I am so excited to be able to introduce to you a new friend to me. Her name is Jen Schultz, and she is an author and a writer and has so many fun things to be able to share. And I'm so excited to have her today as a guest, just to share just her journey, the walls that she's had to overcome. The book that she wrote is called She's Not Your Enemy. And I'm sure that just that title alone would pique your interest and be like, oh, I can relate to that in some way. So I'm excited to have Jen just kind of dive into that for us. What's it about? Leave us with some tools that we can navigate to own our life, to go beyond our walls and stop competing with each other. So Jen, welcome to the podcast. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I am Jen. I am an East Coaster at heart, but I currently live in the Pacific Northwest, and that has been a huge adjustment. We've been here since before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And so moving here, a pandemic happened. We're still, I feel like, getting our feet back, but that's everybody right now.
Yeah.
I am a mom and a wife. I feel like the mom comes first. So I feel bad for my husband. It's summertime. It's crazy. We're trying to keep ourselves together, but I'm a mom of 3 and my husband's awesome too. I love him, but we stay busy, our hands full, heart full, that whole thing.
Yes.
I'm a reader and writer. I love words and I love God's word. I love just being able to get to know him better through the word. I think for a long time, I looked at the Bible as instructions and gotta do this, gotta do this, gotta be better, gotta do that. And I think what I've been discovering over recent years is just, it's so much about his character and his heart towards us, which is full of love, full of compassion. And that's something that I address in my book, actually, is kind of that mind shift from, well, is God some kind of domineering boss who plays favorites and gives some people blessings and other people none? You know, is he a good father? Does he give good gifts? Does he care deeply about each one of us?
So what do you think was the starting point of even wanting to write the book? Was it a specific incident that happened to you, like a last straw kind of moment? Or tell us maybe the beginning of that.
Yeah, it was a number of things. I think one of them was, comparison has been a struggle my whole life. And so I kind of started with this concept of maybe we need to talk about comparison. We see it all the time. We have access to our phones and our news feeds all the time. And it's so easy to let me just take a quick scroll, and all of a sudden you're looking at everybody's fancy houses, their amazing jobs, their cool things that they're doing, their perfect families. And you start to kind of lose yourself in this comparison of, oh, I'm not like that. I'm not together like that. I don't have that. And so I felt like it was very timely, but the more I dug into comparison, I felt like there was a bigger issue. I felt like the issue was more how we looked at God and how we looked at ourselves before how we looked at each other. So kind of taking a step back from, okay, the immediate issue is comparison, but what's really going on is we're trying to uncover our identities, and we can't do that without looking at God first, at his character, his heart towards us, because he is our creator, and then going into just our own, how we looked at ourselves. Because I know for me, the reason I was comparing was I was looking at other people to kind of get my identity and to decide oh, well, if she's doing this, then I must be really hurting or I must be really behind. So that was kind of how it started for me. And there were a number of things I think that kind of added together, but that was the basic point. It kind of came out as I was writing the book more so than at the beginning. I think at the beginning I was like, we're going to tackle comparison.
Yeah. Well, and so I'm curious, because I feel like we can definitely all relate to that. And I think even people that feel like they have really loving, supportive friendships that are actively and intentionally trying to celebrate each other and not compare each other, we still need to hear this message over and over again. So I guess that was kind of my thought too. I was like, if there was a scale, what scale would you put that on between the environment that you felt like you had in that moment? Was it strong? Was it weak? Had you experienced both ends and still had to see your need for this?
Yeah, I mean, it was a constant struggle for me. So I was like, if it's for me, then I'm sure that it's for other people as well. So let's talk about it. And it's been interesting even since the book came out. I've had so many people say, hey, we need to talk about this. Hey, come on the podcast. Hey, let's do this. Let's do that. Because this is something we need to talk about. It's an issue. And
Yeah.
I mean, it connects to our discontent. It connects to our loneliness and our isolation. And I was like, somebody's manipulating us to be divided against each
Yeah.
other, and it's not the other person. Sometimes it
Yes.
is. Sometimes people are,
Yeah.
you know, just cruel on purpose, and that's an awful thing too. But really, at the end of the day, it's not really about them. We
Yeah.
have an enemy, and it's not them. So
Yeah.
that's something that I had to figure out. Is okay. It's a spiritual battle. It's not really me
Hmm.
versus them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like even, especially, we learned a lot of that in COVID. I think it really disrupted a lot of just our everyday life and the way that we functioned. But we can either deliberately choose to go after it, or eventually we will like hit a rock bottom, or it will like, we can't avoid it any longer. That transition somehow, same as like with a parent child, we have to get out of this like rules and subordination to a relationship. And I guess
Mhm.
that's kind of what I was hearing in your transition of like, how do we really just have a relationship with God while we have to be a part of a body, be a part of a church, be a part of another group of people. So whether
Mhm.
you're in a church or you have a group of friends, like we all have communities that we're a part of.
Mhm.
How do we separate like the love for each other and our own identity while rubbing each other the wrong way or challenging each
Yeah.
other, right? Does your
Yeah.
book kind of get into that aspect, or is it more like in friendships?
Yeah, I feel like my goal through it, we end up tackling more insecurity than we really do comparison. And I think again, just identifying ourselves the way that God always intended for us to be identified. And then really rooting ourselves in that identity so we can go forward and kind of get those roadblocks out of the way when it comes to our relationships. Cause that's what gets in the way is our insecurities. Oh, what is she really thinking of me? I'm failing so much in comparison to her. We judge somebody, we write them off based
Yeah.
purely on appearance. And then there's like no hope of a relationship when you do that. When you
Yeah.
decide like, oh, okay, like I see you have a great podcast, you're very business minded, like you're way smarter than me. You could never be my friend. That's it. It's over.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's
Why
it's like,
bother?
no, that's not the case. Like if we dig in, if we dive in,
Yeah.
you are made in the image of God. I'm made in the image of God. It goes so
Yeah.
much deeper than that. And our identities are so much more than just whatever's on the surface, whatever it appears to be, or whatever we think is on the surface we believe about
Yes.
somebody. So
Yeah.
every chapter kind of goes through like, okay, let's get our minds straight about who God actually is and his character, what he says about us, and then we can move forward and start to deal with these issues in our relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. I think in that same vein, I feel like a lot of my transition and the things that I'm trying to do here on Beyond the Walls is even being able to take a step back and realize like these are things that I said, God said, I said, people said, I said, these are the rules,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, society said, right? And kind of
Mm-hmm.
leaving room that, oh, maybe somebody else gets to have an opinion here, or I only go so far. Like, I don't want to be the judge, because I think that's where I'm glad you brought up security, because I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of even what I feel like these last 2 years, I'd say for myself, has really been being refined and challenged, is
Yeah.
just showing up secure. I just have to
Yeah.
just choose to believe that I'm
Mm-hmm.
expert enough.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
And just the blind faith that like, okay, nobody else's life is perfect, even though it looks
Mm-hmm.
perfect, right? Like on the social
Right.
media, we're seeing all the
Right.
things, right? Because I looked at your page and I was like, oh my gosh, like you have a beautiful book. Like there's so many, like your Instagram, and you have more followers, and right.
Oh my
Like
gosh.
there's
Nobody
so
has
many
it figured out. I will
ways,
tell you right now, I do not have
right?
Instagram figured out. I have no idea. Sometimes something works and sometimes it doesn't. It's one of those things, but nobody has it figured out. I think something
Yeah.
that is coming out recently is there's a lot of people who are they had success with one book, and let's talk about my field, with a book
Yeah.
that came out and it sold really well, and that's great. So now they're going on to say, well, let me teach other people how to sell their books really well. And there's been a lot of commentary on that lately of like, whoa, like you're the expert, you know what I
One
mean?
book. Yeah.
Nobody's got it figured out. There's such a combination of like timing and luck and the right people getting
Yeah.
involved. You can't predict when a book is going to do well. You can't give out like, a series of steps that say, this is how you're going to make a book sell well. And so I
Yes.
think there's been a lot of commentary on that. Like, why would you just then go ahead and, like, I
Yeah.
can't blame those people. We all have to make money. We all have to figure it out. Maybe that's their next step. I don't know.
Yeah.
But, just going back to the concept of nobody has it figured out. We don't have it pinpointed. I think a lot of people are coming out and saying, I've sold 20 books and only a couple of them did well. And it's all up in the air. You just do the best you can.
Yeah. Well, okay, so let me ask you this, because I think even in that same vein, so whether whoever's listening, like this applies, whether you're trying to run a podcast or write a book or, living out loud in that kind of way, but just showing up in your regular life, parenting, marriage. I think that speaks to this constant belief that somehow we're going to arrive, right? Like a one and done thing. And so even like, and you kind of spoke to it earlier about identity. And so how do we like keep putting ourselves up and showing up, but we want to be successful? That if our identity is in that success, then we just have to we just keep proving it over and over again.
That's right. Yeah.
How does that feel in your life? Like, what are you wrestling with from that perspective?
Oh gosh. I mean, this whole issue is far from over for me. Like I wrote a book. That does not mean I have graduated. I really just this whole writing process, I would set myself these hurdles, and I'd be like, once I cross that, that means I'm a writer. So I thought, okay, once I have my own space on the internet, I will be a writer. So I got a blog and I started doing that. Well, then there was another hurdle. It was like, well, once I start getting sponsorships and making money through writing, that's when I can call myself a writer. And so I started doing that. Funny enough, that was not my favorite thing to do, and I didn't stay there. Some people do awesome at it, and it is a real job doing all of that. It's a lot of work. It was not for me. So then I was like, okay, well, maybe if I, get an agent, maybe if I start a podcast, maybe if I do this, I will finally be able to say I'm a writer. Oh, if I get a book contract, I'll feel like I made it. If I turn in the manuscript, then I will feel like I made it. When it's held in my hands, then I'll feel. I kept just making these hurdles and never feeling like I arrived. I still don't feel like I've arrived. People will be like, "Wow, you wrote a book! Isn't that awesome? It's on Amazon. It's this and that," and I'm like, yeah, but I still have this feeling, and it's exactly right. If we put our identities in success, if we put it in numbers, if we put it in achievements or things we can put on the wall, like we're just never going to get there. It's got to be in something more solid than that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like when it comes to faith, because I feel like it's one thing to take our identity back from the world or back from our success or our accomplishments. But I think there's so much peace and value when we also can then get it out of ourselves, because I think that's also a lot of pressure. And I feel like that's a lot of more, like so much of like the inner power and just trying to believe that we are all things and we're enough. And I mean, I think we are enough to be loved and we're valuable. But like, man, how much more peace comes when like we give it to somebody else who gets to ultimately make the decision, right? Like there was a creator, there is a creator, like he gets the final say. So I always found like there was so much peace in my mind when I could just like, that's all I do regularly, right? Is just like, let me take it back from you. Let me give it back to God. Cause I don't want that pressure either. Right. Cause I think sometimes it can just get stuck with us. And then we're constantly just trying to prove it to ourselves, even if we don't believe it from other people. I think that's hard to manage too, the positive or the negative.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think it has a lot to do with scarcity mindset too. I don't know if you talk about that a lot on your podcast, but I just think that's something I keep running back into, is just this concept of there's only so much to go around. I have to claim as much of it as possible. If she gets something that I
Mm,
don't have, then that's less for me. If she's at the top, well, I either have to knock her out of the way or I'm just blocked by her and I'll never get up. It's just this
yeah.
mindset of there's not enough, and you're constantly scrambling and hustling to be able to get there. And it's just no way to live. It's not what
Yeah.
God intended for us. Like over and over again in the scriptures, it says, come to me and you'll find rest. Come to me and I'll feed you. Come to me, like my
Yes.
yoke is easy, my burden is light. You're like a tree planted by streams
Yes.
of water. Just again and again in the Bible, it's not like work a little harder and maybe you'll get there.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
no, like release, let go, accept, believe, even like you said, like believe what
Yeah.
God says about you.
Yeah.
Um, the God's abundance is way more than the world's
Yeah.
scarcity. So yeah.
Yeah. That's so true. Um, if we go back even farther, then what
Mhm.
was it either before that you were hustling after, or what made you even like, well, you said you love words, right? And you love to read.
Mhm.
So
Oh
have you
yeah.
always, like, has that been a childhood dream to want to be a writer, or what did you think you would be like when you were a kid as an adult?
Gosh. So I was totally that kid with a flashlight under my covers. I had, 5 zillion journals I started and never finished, all these notebooks lying around. I loved to read and loved to write. I was always, doing I loved those assignments in class where you had to write back and forth with your teacher and like journaling and writing stories. Like I loved all of that. And I
Yeah.
remember I used to get American Girl magazine, or it was Girls Life. It was one or the other. It was one of those two magazines. And they would have
Yes.
this section where on one page, it was the right hand page, they would be talking about somebody with a picture of them as a little girl who is famous now, but they wouldn't reveal who it was until you turn the page. And I would be like, this person, I grew up doing this, I grew up doing that. You had to kind of guess, like, okay, what did this person end up becoming? And you turn the page, it was
Yeah.
like an actress or singer or author. I kind of always had it in my head, like, how cool would it be if that was me in the Girls Life magazine or the American Girl magazine someday, where you had to flip the page and she grew up to be an author. Like, how cool would that be?
Yes.
But it's funny. I think in my head, I was always like, but, with a caveat, you have to be really, really amazing to be an author. Like you could never write a book just as normal average Jen. And I believed that for a very long time. I believed it. My mom would tell me I should write a book and I'd be like, no, mom, like that's never going to happen. I'm not good enough to write a book. Even in my early days of blogging, like I said, I was getting sponsorships. I was, writing reviews about car seats and diapers and all kinds of
Okay.
things, which was great and helpful for my family. But I was doing that because I felt like, oh, I could never write a book. So this will be a way of making an income. I kind of settled for this will work, this will do, but my heart wasn't in it. And
Yeah.
so the more I kept going, the more God kept opening doors and kind of nudging me through them. And I realized, okay, well, I'm going to keep going with this. You opened a door there. Okay, let's keep going. And so that's kind of
Yeah.
how it happened for me.
Wow. Was there a specific um person or moment that you finally just sort of surrendered to, just like, okay, fine, I'll stop resisting? Or did
Mm.
you feel like every step you had to be dragged to the next step and then get surrendered and then get dragged to the next step?
Gosh, I feel like it mostly works the second way. But I do remember this turning point for me where it was around the 4th of July. I remember because my husband and I were traveling and we were near grandparents, so my kids could go stay with the grandparents. We made it out on a like coffee date for the first time in a long time, and I remember having felt all this turmoil about I really
Mm,
don't like doing this. I really don't like what I'm doing. And I finally just blurted it all out. I was like, "Honey, like I don't like getting the diapers and having to write reviews and having to do all it's so much work. It wouldn't be so bad if I actually loved it, but I really don't love it. I really want to write
yeah.
about my faith. That's the most important thing to me. I want to help other people in their faith. I want to help other people who might feel conflicted in their journeys and feel like they're learning about God all over again. Like that's what I want to do." And he said, "You know what? We are in a good position right now. The way that you help our family is by staying home with our kids. So write about what you
Yeah.
want to write about. You're in this great situation where you can do that. So do it." And it just felt wonderful to like, I finally felt like I had permission to do it. Not that my husband
Yeah.
needs to give me permission to do that, but I really felt
Yeah.
like, okay, like this relief of like, I can do this. I don't need to like hustle and try to get all these jobs and write all these
Yeah.
things. Like I can write about what I really want to write about.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask you this. So we'll see if what you think about it. But as you were describing that, because I felt like I kind of hit that crossroads at some point where I was willing
Mm,
to just admit that I just did not. So I always wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. I was a
mm,
stay-at-home mom. My husband totally
mhm,
supported me being a stay-at-home mom. But I found myself hating being a stay-at-home mom. But I
mhm,
didn't really want to do anything else. Like, so I was
mhm.
so just filled with shame and guilt
Yeah.
and like just that I couldn't face it myself until
Mhm.
finally I did. And then I said that out loud to my husband and he was like, well, obviously. Like that tracks. And I was like, oh, ouch. But also like this, it's almost like I feel like it's possible that it's not even permission, but I think it
Mm,
is a freedom and a space to stop using them as a scapegoat. Like
mm.
I really
Yeah.
needed to do it, but we were not doing something differently because that's what we'd signed up for. Like somehow we were
Mhm.
pigeonholed into this spot as if like your husband needed you to keep doing this miserable thing. I don't know if you
Yeah.
felt like any of that or if you'd thought about it before, but I think that's just what it made it think
I
for myself.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. It is so much harder being a stay-at-home mom than anybody realizes. Like
Yeah.
it's so much work. It's so much emotional work all the time,
Yeah.
24/7. So I totally get
Yeah.
that. And I
Yeah.
totally get the feeling of like this is not what I really want to do. I'm discovering that as I go. Like
Yeah.
and feeling even pigeonholed to it. I do feel like there in my upbringing there was a sense of like this is kind of what you do. I
Yeah.
also feel like I'm basically unemployable. Like so I'm very
Mm.
grateful that my husband takes care of the
Yes.
breadwinning for our family. But it does open up opportunities for me to pursue things that I want to pursue, like writing. And that's kind of what led me here.
Yeah.
So it's amazing. And I'm sure it
Yeah.
opened up doors for you too to be able to like
For
do what you want to
sure.
do, which is
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like that's part of even what um I keep saying is like I want to provide a space for people to re-choose and
Mm,
recreate, right? Because you
yeah.
really
Mm,
were still doing the things you wanted to do, but you were doing them in a way that it might have brought you joy at first, but it didn't any
mm,
longer. And so
no.
even just that ability to face that fear and to face the like the honesty to face yourself to say like
Yeah.
this either never was my dream
Mhm.
or it was, but it's no longer working in its current state, right? Like how do we
Exactly. Yeah,
either
absolutely. Yep.
re-choose it or recreate like so you even to be able to say like this whole time you've wanted to be an author and you've just been trying out all these different ways
Right?
and they if they fit it for a moment and then you're like no that wasn't quite it or we've matured
Right.
enough right we were ready for a bigger step we're more mature
Yeah.
we're more prepared for the bigger and better
Yeah.
so how do we just be along the journey
Yeah.
without blaming others without using them as reasons we should or shouldn't and
Yes.
really
Yeah,
what are we
absolutely.
called to
Yeah. Absolutely. I agree with that.
yeah
I
that's
think it's one of those things that's conquering the fear. Like if you
mm,
can say like this is what I really want, this is what it's going to take to go after it and really battling the fear. I think that's
yeah
when you know you're onto something. It's like, oh, this actually
yeah
scares me. Like if it doesn't scare you, it's probably not your true call. I don't know. I might be wrong about
Yes.
that. Maybe there are some
Yeah.
people who are like, I always knew and it never was scary. But I think in my
Mm,
experience, doing something scary was a big part of it.
for sure. Well, and it's almost like I feel like the scary part of it is leaning into your weakness about it. Right? Like I
Mm-hmm.
almost feel like I can't this is like bigger than me. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to
Yeah.
need somebody else to participate and whether that's
Yeah.
God or it's you needed other people involved, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I feel like that's been kind of even some of just what I've been transitioning through is just being willing to be vulnerable enough to just be okay to fail.
Yeah.
And that's scary. Do you have
Yeah.
any,
It
what do
is.
you feel like? Do you focus more on just trying to overcome this scarcity mindset or facing not being fearful? What do you think is it for you?
I think it's probably the fear. I think it's even I remember hesitating to sign with my agent. I connected with an agent in 2020, and we had a phone call, this great conversation. I was like, she is amazing. She knows her stuff. She was like, I'd like to represent you. And I said, okay, we'll see. And it took me, how long did it take me to sign the contract? I feel like it took several weeks because I was so anxious about, okay, this means that I'm putting myself out there now. There's no going back. Like, what if I actually get a book deal and I put out all of my business for anybody to read, anybody to pick up on Amazon, And I was just terrified. I really dealt with some serious anxiety in that season of like, this is really scary to put myself out there like this. And God came alongside me in that season, and there were lots of reminders of, you're okay. It's going to be okay. I'm the one opening up these doors. So that was kind of how it all went down for me, but definitely conquering that fear.
Yeah.
That was a big part
Did
of it.
you already know, like, how far were you in the writing process of this book? Like, did you write it and know the topic and then get a publisher? Or an
No.
agent?
So I actually started with a completely different proposal. And that was how I basically started connecting with this agent. And we workshopped that proposal. We made it into a full book proposal and sent it out and got a lot of really great feedback on the writing, which was really encouraging. But they just weren't looking for that topic at the time. And then worked on a different proposal and actually ended up in a meeting with a publisher who was like, let's work on this concept a little bit. And it shaped into what became the book. So that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Again, I feel like I crept in the back door of publishing because it just there were so many doors I couldn't have opened myself, and so many people who believed in me before I really had anything to show for it, honestly.
Yeah. That would be daunting, I would imagine, to all of it, right? All of it is just facing your fears and the walls every step of the way. What was, out of curiosity, if you can share, what was your first topic or proposal? Like, what was the theme originally?
Yeah, it was very much about kind of a before and after of my faith. So the before was very similar to what I shared before, was just believing like, oh, I have to hustle to prove my worth. I have to, people pleasing and perfectionism, and I have to keep basically like try harder Christianity. And I got to a place where I just completely burned out and couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't, put on a happy face and also really be trying and striving and earning and doing all these things. And it came down to, me breaking down, speaking with some people, just trusted advisors, and doing some counseling and really getting to this place of, oh, I've had this perspective of God on wrong my whole life. I have thought that he was just, this like taskmaster who expected me to get all these things done, and checking his watch and shaking his head in frustration with me. And that's never who he was, and that's never how he saw me. And so kind of this before after mentality. I would still love to write that book someday. It was kind of, I think, too much of a memoir for people. And that was it. It just was not, I was not in a place to write that, which is amazing because I really wasn't at the time. There's been, I think, even more since. But then it turned into steps that opened the doors for this book to happen, and that was an amazing process, and I loved it, and I hope to get to do it again.
What would be a piece of advice that you would give to others that might be in that boat? Because I think sometimes what we see is people just go from one extreme to the next, right? Like almost like, let me just throw God completely out and go search everywhere else, as opposed to let me, I don't know if these would be your kind of words, but I feel like this was kind of my journey, was like, let me just let God tell me who he is. Because I've been telling me who I say God says he is this, most of my life. And so what was one thing that I think kept you sort of still desiring to understand God? Or what would you suggest to somebody else who might be at the beginning of that kind of crazy phase?
It's a good question.
It's crazy, but just in depth and
it feels crazy though. I totally understand that.
Yeah,
it's very complicated, especially when you've only ever seen God one way. I think It's been a lot of things for me. I think, being able to, again, talk with somebody you can trust. I am a big advocate for biblical counseling, getting help
Mm,
from someone who can ask the right questions and maybe not tell you the answers so much as give you space to kind of process them and figure them out, and give you
yeah.
direction on scriptures to look at and books to read. It was transformational for me, honestly. And then I think beyond that, just even lately, it's been getting a lot of intentional, quiet, alone time with God, being still with
Mm.
Him, not necessarily like, let me find the right answer in the Bible, which the Bible is there to help give us answers to our questions.
Mm-hmm.
So not to diminish that or to take it out of the picture, but I think I was constantly like scrambling through the Bible. There's even a verse about that Jesus says, like, you diligently search the scriptures, but I'm right in front of you, basically. Like, I'm right here and
Mm,
you don't know that it's me. And so I think even just spending that intentional, just quiet time with God, listening, tuning out everything else, taking a walk with Him, whatever
yeah.
it is, I think that's been really helpful for me, to kind of
Yeah.
see Him differently, to kind of quiet everything else out and not just hear what people are telling me He is, or hear my own
Yeah.
background repeat track telling me who God is, but just
Yeah.
this is a thought I've never had before. Like, once I started doing that, I
Mm,
started getting thoughts like, whoa, where did that come from? That wasn't for
mm,
me. I have this whole story, which I won't get into, but just the first time I really felt like I kind of heard God clearly, even though it wasn't audible, was
yeah.
driving. And I was really frustrated and in tears and crying out to God. And it got quiet. And I felt like God was saying, I do my best work with nothing. Like, you feel like
Yeah.
you're at nothing. That's where I shine. So
Yeah.
give me the
Yeah.
time and space to do that. And from then
Yeah.
on, I feel like I'm constantly like, what's God saying? Like, I want to hear you again. Tell me. And
Yes.
He loves that kind of heart. He loves that kind of
Yeah.
just seeking Him in everything and let me hear what you have to say, God. So I think
Yeah.
making space for that, tuning out the extra noise,
Yeah.
intentional, quiet, all of that is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there is so much wisdom I think that we gain even just by life, right? Like
Right.
I feel that way now. Like I don't know, I'm just getting more and more like sentimental and I'm getting more emotional and more, like it's just like
Yeah.
as we age, like I feel like I'm enjoying it a lot, but it's just
Mhm.
like it makes sense when we're so crazy in our teen years and then we feel so adamant like we know it all. Like we always think we know it all. I feel like maybe that's the
Mhm.
path that like just as we age, the more humble we become to
Mhm.
possibly like, oh, maybe
Maybe.
I maybe I
Makes
don't have all
sense.
the answers and
Right.
could there be another way? Like is it
Right.
possible for there to be another way and to not
Yeah.
fear contemplation? I
Yeah.
think that's I'm hearing a
Yeah.
lot
Very true.
in yours of like, there's just
Yeah.
already was an answer. This is the only answer.
Mhm.
Like I
That's
remember my sister and I was in a tough spot in just a season and just feeling like there's only one way to please God right now. And I
it. Mhm.
think it just spoke so much life. And she's like, God is so big. Like if he really said that there was this like you have to do it this one way like as like it's in this
Mhm.
perfection, right? Like
Yeah.
that there's a million ways we can do it wrong but there's only one way to do it right to please God.
Right?
And we're like,
Gosh.
God didn't say that, I said God said,
Right?
right?
Yeah,
Like can we
absolutely.
choose to just believe that like oh my gosh maybe it is just more the heart or the posture in which
Yeah.
we're living and not necessarily the outcome or what we actually
Right.
do. Like I don't know,
Right.
does he really care what kind of job you have as opposed to like who you are at the job? Or are
Right.
you living out of fear or
Mhm.
scarcity or,
Yeah.
and I think that's is the joy of growing older.
I so agree. Well, and I wanted to add that I feel like this is something that science is catching up on too, the kind of contemplation.
Mm,
I never finished this book, so let me start with that. But I read a
okay.
book recently that was, or started the book that was, it was all about how boredom boosts your creativity. So instead of like,
Mm,
let me, while I'm folding laundry, also watch TV so I can keep my mind engaged and entertained and all of that. It was like, nope,
mm,
just fold the laundry. Just go on a
mm,
walk without any kind of music or podcast or anything. We fill ourselves up so much with this like entertainment, with so much going on, that
yeah.
we lose kind of this silence and this quiet and boredom. Like, it was so funny that the whole book was about boredom boosting your creativity, but it
Yeah.
was like, you kind of have to get to this space of like letting your imagination regenerate instead of
Yes.
being fed by something else telling you what you're supposed to think and do. So I found that really fascinating too, is
Yeah.
that there's some contemplation there as well. And it's backed
Yeah.
up by science, like science and the Bible, all of it comes together really.
Yes. Well, it's funny that you use the word contemplation because so
Mm.
my cousin wrote a book and it's
Okay.
called Being with God. And so I just got
I
it
need
and
it.
I was, yeah, it's really good. And it's all about like contemplative prayer and just kind of taking down all the
Love it.
noise and all the chaos. And so I just started it. And
Okay.
so I feel like even in his preface, he's like, it's going to be uncomfortable. Like just us, like step one, acknowledge there's so much noise and we're distracting ourselves. Right. And then there's like a
Yeah. Yeah.
willingness to just choose to be quiet and
Yeah.
then be in that awkward space of like, we're not good at being quiet yet. So it's almost like it
No.
feels like a double challenge, right? Because like we don't
Yeah.
really even want to take the time to be quiet. And then
Mhm.
we're uncomfortable in the quiet. But
Yeah.
if we're willing to engage, we'll get better and find the peace on the other side.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I don't know.
absolutely.
Do you have any good tips or do you just agree in your own personal journey, like of how that's worked for you?
It's something I keep learning. And okay, so here's one thing is that I recently heard about different spiritual, I guess, profiles or personalities. So
Hmm.
there are different, I think they said that there are 9 of them, which I found interesting, kind of correlated with the Enneagram. But
Yeah.
you have your ways that you feel closer to God. There are certain,
Mm.
it's this personality is how you feel close to God. And one of mine is for sure contemplation, but I just never realized it. It was never something that I just thought there was one way to be. There's only one way to please God and there's only one way to connect with
Yes.
him. And so to kind of expand that mindset to like, oh, I actually like, I feel more connected to God when I, do a contemplative prayer. I sit and just kind of think about what it's like to just be with God. And, that's just
Yeah.
really cool to me and exciting and interesting. Whereas to someone else, they might be like, that sounds crazy. I need to do
Yeah.
something. And that's totally your way to connect with God. So
Yeah.
finding that out was really helpful. And then I've just been reading a ton of books about, what it means to be with God. I read the book With by Sky Jethani, I think is his name. Gosh,
Mm.
now I'm going to say that wrong, but it's called With, and it's a great book.
Okay.
I read this book called The Wild Land Within by Lisa Colon Delay, which I feel like I've
Ooh.
been sharing all over the world because I loved this book so much. I keep learning about contemplative prayer and just doing research
Mm.
on it because I'm like, oh, this is something that I only felt like growing up, I prayer is talking to God. That's all there is. But to
Mm.
stop and listen and realize that communication is a two-way street, I was like, oh, this is completely different. I didn't stop to really think
Yeah.
about that. That God is still speaking to us. Like, why would God have stopped speaking to us
Yeah.
since biblical days? Like, oh, now I'm silent,
Yeah.
figure it out. No, like
Mm.
he's still talking to us. I actually put up a post on Instagram the other day about hearing God, and I had someone respond and say, no, like that's new age, God doesn't speak to us. And I was like, that's actually really sad that you
Yeah.
feel like God does not reach out to you. God doesn't speak to you. He doesn't hear, like he hears us,
Yeah.
but he won't respond.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I have any tips from that, but I do feel like it's a practice. I do feel like it's one of those things I have to intentionally sit myself down and
Yeah.
make it quiet. It's hard to do as a mom, but just
Yeah.
get quiet, one-to-one time with God, especially outside. I feel like that helps me so much.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think what I am hearing from you too is even in all of this is like, if we're feeling like we're striving, like, can we be willing to take a step back and
Mhm.
like consider, are we trying to just fit ourselves into this other box? Like a,
Yeah.
a family given, a church given, another person given, myself given box. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean that there's something wrong with that group of people or the church or the family or the you or the right. Like
Mhm.
we don't have to go that far, but like, how
Yeah.
about if you just reconsider, like there is another way that works
Mhm.
with your created way of being, right? Like
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
if there's multiple ways to please God, and I think
Mhm.
that was one of the biggest things that I realized for myself because I had cut off so many parts of my life, like I just devalued. I mean,
Mm.
part of my nature, I don't think that I am naturally big into the arts, or music, or like I'm just not wired that way. That I went
Mm.
so far as to like demonize them almost. Like there's no value in them. I don't even
Yeah.
want to know about them. I
Yeah.
don't care about history. I
Right.
don't care about my
Yeah.
education. And I'm
Yeah.
like, there's another way. Like there's parts of life that I'm cutting off from myself to
Yep.
engage in the world around me, to engage with other people that do love, right? Like that enjoy those things. How can we relate together with them as opposed to
Yeah.
like, that's wrong? And I think we're so
Right.
quick as people to be like, that's right. This is the right way and this is the wrong way. And
Yeah.
instead, like, how about we take the morality out of it and just, this is a
Mm.
way. This is a way to connect with
Yeah.
God. There's multiple ways to please Him.
Yeah.
And so I think just your bravery and leading by example to share, like, oh, maybe there's another way that fits, that God's actually calling me to, that I've been
Yeah.
resisting, right? Like that I've
Yeah.
decided is not something I'm allowed to have or to participate in.
Right.
And
Yeah. Who are we to tell God like what he wants to
yeah,
give us? Like you're allowed to give us this good gift, but not this one.
yeah.
Or this promise is for someone else, but it's not for
Mm,
me. Like I don't know. I feel like I'm
yeah.
learning a lot about like, wow, I really used to be arrogant, thinking like I'll tell God what's okay. That's
Yeah.
not the
Yes.
case.
That's what I feel with like the forgiveness aspect when we're like, I can't forgive myself though. Right. And you're like,
Mm,
if God
yeah.
wants to free, like, who am I to argue with God and tell him, refuse his
Right.
gift of forgiveness? Like,
Right. Absolutely.
okay, I got to wrestle with that. So,
Right.
well, Jen, I'm so grateful for you just sharing the wisdom that you have and sharing your book. Can you tell people again where they can find it and any one last bit of encouragement you want to leave with anybody?
Yeah, well, you can find it on Amazon. You can find it on my publisher's website, David C. Cook. You can, yeah, just Google it and you'll find She's Not Your Enemy. It has a very distinctive cover, so you won't be able to miss it. I felt like the art team did an incredible job with it. And I'm online too. I'm at Jen Schultz author, which is kind of awkward for me still to like have put tacked author on the end of my name, but my name is such a common name that I had to do something. So I'm like, I'm owning it. Jen Schultz author. That's who I am.
That's right.
Which is a whole different conversation. If we had more time, I would be like, let's talk about, like owning the name that you want to be, owning the title you want to have. But anyway, that's a whole different thing.
Yes.
But I love to interact with people online. I love to make social media social. So definitely be in touch with me. Come find me there. And yeah, I would just leave. I don't know. I feel like we just had a great conversation just about maybe thinking about things differently and being open to trying things a different way, and knowing that God loves us to come before him just as we are. We don't have to get ourselves together. We don't have to look a certain way or wait until our lives are perfect. Any way that we approach him is so open to him because he invites us in and he actually runs out to meet us, which I think is such a wonderful thing. So
it really is. Oh, well, thank you so much, Jen. I appreciate it. And we appreciate your time. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.